Sociology is like a big puzzle. Trying to figure out why people behave the way they do and how they might act in the future helps us understand beyond the superficial. By studying different people and how society works, we can gather social pieces that help us make better decisions on how to make the world a better place. By studying different people and how society works, we can gather social pieces that help us make better decisions on how to improve the world.
Reviving tradition, the essential role of doulas and midwives in childbirth. Welcome to Sociologically Speaking. I'm your host, Rena Risper. Today, we're exploring the vital role of doulas and midwives in childbirth. As families grow smaller and more distant, support during childbirth is more important than ever. I spent my first pregnancy in the early 90s alone on bed rest, scared and wishing that I had someone to advocate for me and my baby. Governor Whitmer's 2023 Healthy Moms, Healthy Babies initiative is now offering doula services to Medicaid recipients. In January of 2023, Governor Whitmer said that more than 63% of maternal deaths in Michigan are preventable. She added that by providing doula services, we are helping address health disparities and ensuring access to high-quality health care that meets their individual needs. This highlights how vital this support is for all families. Let's explore how these birth professionals are changing lives.
There's a much better way that we can experience pregnancy.
I feel like when you give birth, you should feel powerful and liberated to make your own decisions.
It's an experiment that has gone on forever and ever. And we're qualified to do this. Birthing folks we're qualified to do this.
As a doula, I could help at a hospital or at home or birthing center, wherever. But I can help you in the woods.
What inspired me to become a midwife was my first birth experience. That experience was pretty typical. This was back in the mid-70s. And what I mean by pretty typical is that the way that birth was done then is that you labored in one room, they took you down the hall to a delivery room, and then they took you to recovery afterwards. And even though I had educated myself, I had taken childbirth classes, back then they were called Miles classes, and felt prepared. Once I got into the hospital, everything changed. The dynamics were different. We understand that now, the power differential that happens. And it ended up being typical for that time in that when I had to behave a certain way, when I got to the delivery room, there were the classic metal stirrups that my legs were buckled into, and I was forced to lay flat, and I was told if I touched anything, because they would put these drapes, these quote-unquote sterile drapes on you, and if I touched it, we're going to have to tie your hands down. So it was all that kind of thing that happened. And it ended up being a forceps delivery. He ended up with a broken clavicle. But even with all that, when I got to recovery and I looked at my baby, there was such a peacefulness about him that it made me peaceful. And so I looked at him and I remember saying, this has to be wrong. There has to be a different way to give birth. And so after that point, I started reading everything I could get my hands on about birth. At the time, I was not even a nurse. I was a medical technologist, so I did have some science background and some medical information. But I just started reading as much as I could read and talking to as many people as I could. I began to study birth on my own, and then I began to connect and go to conferences and learn more about birth. I became a certified childbirth educator myself. Doula is someone who has been especially trained to accompany people that are giving birth. They're trained in the psychological and the physical support of people during that process, but also before and after. So a lot of doulas will meet the families that they're working with during the pregnancy, work with them, get to know what their needs might be. And a lot of the doulas that I've worked with are knowledgeable about community resources so they can help connect families, et cetera, et cetera. They accompany the person coming in and support them during the labor and birth process. And then for those who are postpartum doulas as well, They will visit the family at home, sometimes one, sometimes four, however many visits postpartum, to make sure that things are going well during that transition. For midwives, midwives do a lot of that same thing, but we're also the way that we describe it is catching babies. We help the mom during the actual time, and we're eyes and ears, our senses are in tune during the process of the birth itself to know when things are going well and when something might not be just quite right. We do the prenatal care, the prenatal visits, meaning coming in for fetal heart tone checks and making sure baby's doing well and mom's doing well. There are some of us that have postpartum as part of what we do. And there's different ways that we do postpartum follow-up. There's the traditional 6-week postpartum exam, but there's also some midwives that have practices where they actually go and visit. They do home visits, conversations, phone contact, now with telehealth, video visits as well. So we are more involved in the actual pregnancy, giving pregnancy care and the birth process.
Can you give us some insight to what you have seen over the years regarding doulas, and even if they were termed something else?
Yes. Well, back again, after I had my first baby and in my study of birth and becoming a childbirth educator, I also became what was then called a labor companion.
What year was that?
Oh my gosh. That would have been in the 80s. That probably would have been like mid to late 80s. And so I did it for free, because I felt like it was giving me invaluable experience towards becoming a midwife. So I accompanied women when they were in labor and having babies. Right as I was like transitioning out of being a labor companion, the information and the understanding of the word doula kind of started coming into being, and people began to train to be a doula. It became a more acknowledged profession. The thought and the idea and the actual practical thing of women attending women during birth it's ancient. I mean, women have always attended other women in birth. I was just at a conference, an international conference recently, and met midwives and doulas and doctors, and we were all women, and just talking to them about the history of birth in their cultures, in their countries. Women have always attended women. Mothers would be with daughters that were having babies. Sisters would be with their sisters when they had babies. Aunts would attend. Women around women having a baby was a very ancient and normal kind of thing. The doulas that we think of now and people that are seeking doulas and employing doulas for part of their birth experience, they're specifically trained in the physical and psychological support of women when they're in labor, when birthing people are in labor. So there's more of a formalized way that it's done now, but it's always been there. Even in this country, long ago, before birth became centralized in hospitals, you had communities, and particularly Black women as midwives is what one of the terms they've used is granny midwives. Helped everybody get here. It was not even a thing where Black midwives were limited to Black folks. It's just that birth did not happen in the hospital. So the experienced, wise women that had been attending women having babies and knew what to do and what not to do, et cetera, they attended everybody.
How was it having a doula help you out during Allie's pregnancy?
It was helpful having a doula.
In your own words, what is a doula?
A doula is a support system for a family with a baby.
So, you are an amazing mother. Every time I see you with your children, you are just so engaged. And I found out that not only are you a breastfeeding mother, but you use a doula as well. You're kind of a unicorn in this world. How do you feel about the new initiatives to bring more doulas on? And do you feel as though BIPOC women have more of a challenge when it comes to having a healthy birth?
I think BIPOC women definitely have more of a challenge, and having a doula can definitely make a huge difference. Doctors, they are supposed to operate within standards. This is what we always do. This is our standard medical practice. Black women aren't the standard. Those standards are set based off of white women most of the time. We have completely different complications and things that are unique to us. And if we don't know how to advocate for ourselves, or we're too in pain because we're literally bringing a human into the world, who's in the room to make sure that our best interest is taken into account?
I want to know a little bit more about your experience having a doula.
So I'll start by kind of explaining my first birth. My pregnancy was easy. I had no complications, no signs that anything would go astray. But when I went into the hospital to have my son, I had a fever, I had an infection, and they allowed me to be in labor for a few hours, but his heart rate kept bottoming out. To fear that I was going to lose my baby, and my first baby, I had worked for 9 months, almost 10 months, to get this child out safely. I was terrified that I was going to lose him. And it was just a really hard experience. And he was born, he had meconium aspiration. He was in the NICU for 10 days. And I remember going and visiting him in the NICU and crying that why couldn't I bring my baby home? It was such a hard experience. And so when I got pregnant with my daughter, I waited 4 years. I had to heal from that trauma, from having such a hard birth. And when I had my daughter, I just wanted things to go differently. So I kind of let things go the way that they go, and didn't have such a strict plan, because I had learned that you can plan all you want and it's not going to work out that way. You don't get to choose when there's a baby involved. They kind of take the wheel and get ready for a life of that. But I wanted to have as much control as possible and not let fear dictate my decisions, which is where my doula came in. That I wanted someone that could listen to what was going on and inform me in a non-scary way of what my alternatives were, that I didn't have to go straight with what the doctors thought was easiest or what they thought would fit best in their schedule. There are alternatives that make me feel more comfortable, can bring my baby into the world safe, that don't require a bunch of drugs, and knowing that if an emergency situation came up again, I had someone that would talk to the doctors, be able to decipher the information, and bring me back options that I could choose from without being scared.
Because we're so used to dealing with medical circumstances where we're always keeping information back just in case.
Yeah.
So if you were to be in front of a class of women in their first trimester who are getting ready to make decisions whether they're going to get a doula or not, what would you tell them?
My circumstance was a little bit different because I have known my doula for years. But I think that is the purpose of a doula, is they're supposed to be the person that you can rely on, that you don't have to hide things from them. You get to spend time developing a relationship, and it's not a 10-minute OBGYN appointment in and out. They take the time to get to know you. They want to invest in you. They care about you. It's a friendship that develops over time where they have your best interest in mind when they bring options to you. Doulas get in it because they care about the birthing experience. A lot of doulas are mothers themselves, and they know how hard it can be. And husbands and supportive partners can be great, but having someone that has gone through the experience and can explain to you in detail, I know how that feels, but you can do it, and I'm here. And just to have someone pour into you like that, it's an amazing feeling. It's so much peace of mind. Again, it's the development of a relationship with your doula, that having someone there that knows you and can anticipate what you need in the moment and can always be changing. Let's do some massage, or let's do some deep breathing. Let's turn these lights down.
Chelsea, you're a doula.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that experience, being a doula and being a doula for a friend.
Being a doula is something I knew I wanted to do after my first birth, because I researched what a doula was while I was pregnant. And I was telling my mom, look, you can be my doula during my birth. So you can help me with like different pain management and like aromatherapy. So I was telling her that, and then after I had my daughter, I was still like researching, watching different birthing videos and stuff. So I knew I wanted to be a doula. My favorite part about being a doula is the whole journey from pregnancy to birth, being able to build the relationship with the mother, helping her, support her through the pregnancy, and then supporting her to bring her baby into the world.
So you are what I would call a prenatal doula?
I would help through prenatal, and I would support through the birth. There are actually a lot of like different types of doulas. So there's birth doulas, postpartum doulas, there's even death doulas.
I believe that it's something that's really needed. I think that grief causes a lot of different issues in families. So being a doula to your friend, now your sister-in-law, what was that relationship like?
I knew how her first birth went, and I'm like, we're not about to have this again. I told her that I'm about to be her doula so she can have a birth that she wanted and not have a traumatizing birth.
I think that a lot of BIPOC women need someone like you in their life.
More BIPOC people are needed as doulas.
Is it because we are not heard? Is it because we need the extra support? Or do we need the extra the extra enforcement?
All of the above. The BIPOC community need more doulas to prevent traumatizing births, to lower the curve of deaths in hospitals.
So do you have any advice for someone who is looking to become a doula? Do you have to be licensed?
You don't have to be licensed to be a doula. I think anybody can be a doula as long as you're educated on the matter of birth, labor, and pregnancy. There are different programs and classes you could take to become a doula. I took a Doula Training, which was a 3-day training. We were taught birth, different pain management, positions, breastfeeding. So we learned a lot in the class. I didn't get my certification through Doula because I felt like I needed to be more educated on Black births. I feel like they weren't for Black people.
What were some of the things you needed to be educated about? Was it just the numbers? Was it the trauma that we experienced? Was it the idea that we may possibly, in some fantasy world, be able to tolerate pain more?
Some people do think we have a higher pain tolerance and are stronger as people in general, but that's not always the case. Helping women have babies is beautiful, nerve-wracking, scary sometimes, because you never know like what can happen through the birth. So I do go in with a positive mind and keep the birthing person, that my client at the time, like I keep them first. I don't think about the doctors or the nurses. I think about their needs. So if I know they're in pain, I try to do like different positions. There's hip squeezes they can do if they're having more back contractions. So I think about all their needs before And if the doctors come in and say, oh, it's been a while, we should start Pitocin, or you want to get the epidural. So at that point, I would talk to my client and ask them, or reiterate to them, I know you said you didn't want this procedure. Do you want it now? You can wait and get it if you're thinking about it, or we cannot get it at all still, because you do not have to do this. And then they would say, no, I don't want to do it, or I'll wait longer to see how progress goes. And then I would let the doctor know she said she doesn't want it, or she's going to wait a little longer.
How do doctors deal with that, not being in total control?
They see birth as a medical intervention, basically, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be rushed. Birth should be seen as something sacred and not something that should be rushed along so you can get to your next birthing person so you can get more money in your day.
She was very she put on the different hats, that's my niece, don't do that to her. And then but as your doula, it's your journey. So to have someone there to empower you, is this what you want? That there are other alternatives. We can try this before we have to jump to that extreme. And it's so empowering to you have those thoughts, I don't want to do that. That's not what I want to do. But having someone scare you into doing it, you don't want to be at fault for your baby being hurt. So having that other, the angel and the devil kind of medical professions, it's your choice. And doctors are often it's my choice. Let's hurry this along.
And with that, we have to remember as birthing people and that doctors work for you. You don't work for them.
Amen. You should talk about the fact that your birthing story was right. You delivered your own baby. You, with no drugs in your bed, you caught your baby as she came out. That's why I wanted her to be my doula. That sounds hard.
I have 3 kids. All 3 of my kids have been natural births. 2 was in the hospital. So with my first birth, I did go in the hospital. I was actually at work when I went into labor with my first daughter. And after I worked that whole shift, laughing, giggling, guys, I think I'm in labor. Left work, went home, told Dad, I think I'm in labor. I worked this whole shift. We gotta go to the hospital. It wasn't bad, but not knowing, I knew the pain was bad. I was screaming and everything with her. Then I had researched everything, knew different pain management with my son. So with him, I stayed home through the contractions. When I first started, I stayed home. I knew I wasn't about to go to the hospital until I knew I was close to transition, which is meaning I'm close to pushing him out. So I didn't leave home until late. I was driving around with having contractions, dropping his sister off to the babysitter. I think I even picked my brother and nephew up from basketball camp. And then I went to the hospital because I'm okay, it's time to go now. I had him in triage, so I didn't even make it into the actual delivery room. We were still in triage, and I had him in triage. And then after him is when I took my actual doula training. And after I got my training, I'm I'm not going into the hospital again. I didn't even want to go to the hospital with him, my second baby. With my third baby, I decided to have a home birth, which is actually a free birth, where I just had the baby at home, no medical staff or nurses to intervene in my birth. I did have my friend there. She's a doula as well, so she was there to just make sure everything went smoothly. If I needed like extra support in pain management, I could, like, she would help me with that. But I also had like my aunt, dad, and like my son was there. My daughter was at school, and I had her on my bed. So I researched everything I needed to have her. Had my bed covered and pushed her on my bed. Things went smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
Though you can't birth in fear, because that's when like things start to go wrong, when you're like in your head and thinking like, oh, this is gonna go wrong. If you're thinking it's probably gonna go wrong, or you're gonna end up making yourself go to the hospital. Having a home birth or a free birth, like, because you can have a home water birth or a free birth, you do have to prepare yourself mentally and physically at that, because you can't go in being scared of the what ifs. You have to say, this isn't gonna happen. This is my body. My body is doing what it's meant to do. Saying affirmations to your body and your baby and keeping your body moving. It helps with the pain management.
I know for my first birth, it was so hard. But to have those affirmations that like, my birthing story will be what it's supposed to be.
We are on the site of the former Michigan Female College. We're standing in front of the superintendent's house, which is now the home of Willow Tree Family Center. So have you had your first client?
Yeah, I've been a doula for 4 years.
20 years old and helping
Yeah.
birth babies.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Mine
What does
was-
your mom say?
She loves to brag about me. She does. She's like, oh, my daughter. I told her, like, don't tell people that I'm in nursing school yet. Give me like a year. So she's always like, anything birth. She'll like be like, oh, my daughter can help you. She loves it. She loves it. And my little sister's like, yeah, I'm the reason. Like, you saw me be born and you thought it was so cool.
That's really important that you have that kind of family support. It seems as though this is something that you were just born to do.
It feels like it. It really does. I like feel every time I step into a birthing space, I'm like, this is where I'm meant to be. But I think that it's really important to understand like our place in the birthing area for birthing space for specifically Black women, and how it can save them from abuse. And I just think that we're way more than just a trend. It kind of sometimes feels like we're a trend, but we make a big difference.
As we conclude today's program, we'd like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our sponsors, whose support makes this initiative possible. A special thanks to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, dedicated to supporting community-led efforts in Prosperity Region 7.